Three play-by-play voices with us here. Two from the Big Ten Conference. The Wisconsin Sportscaster of the Year, Matt Lepay, voice of the Badgers. The Ohio Sportscaster of the Year, Paul Keels, voice of the Buckeyes. And the NSMA Board President, radio play-by-play voice of the Atlanta Falcons. Also calls games on TV for ACC Network and is the co-host of the Packer and Durham Morning Show, Wes Durham. Turn it over to Wes here.
Thank you, Matt. First of all, thanks everybody for being here. Hope you're getting something from today that will help your career grow. Hope you're getting a lot of information, getting a chance to network and meet people. It's funny they asked us to talk about networking. We'll get to kind of all that, and I think we've all talked about in getting ready for this. We'll also save time for questions at the end because I think that can be the most valuable piece in the room at the end of the day on all these topics, not just this one. I think it's really important, as I said last night to some of you, that you come away from this with working knowledge of other people and maybe even friends. And these are two of my best friends in this business. Even though we've only done, probably a combined 4 broadcasts together of the same games. I met Paul Keels in 1993 when somehow or another I was doing Vanderbilt on radio, and he was the voice of the Cincinnati Bearcats, coached by Rick Mentor. And then I met Matt in late 90s when Wisconsin played Georgia Tech in an ill-fated Bo Ryan's first year, ACC Big Ten Challenge game. And one thing connects, and we've stayed friends, and there's an old war story going around about a 72-hour period about 12 years ago where 3 ACC teams might have been going to the Big Ten, and I was the happiest guy ever. But that all being said, I think it's important as your career moves or as your career changes direction, and I think we've got to be honest about where the industry is, that you have connections. And those connections are fellow competitors in the industry, people that do the same thing. You know, it's interesting to listen to Jeff, who worked for a newspaper, now works for the team. Every job's a little different. The disciplines are the same, but the people who can bond with you the quickest are typically the people who you are competing with in one way or another, or people that have become your friends through the business that you're in. So I think that's one of the boilerplate things we want to talk about. For me, the concept of getting to know other people was given to me by my dad because he said, you may want to be in this business and you can let me have tapes and I can listen to you and tell you if you're doing well or wrong, but at the end of the day, you got to send your tapes to other people. And I did that as a senior in college and then applied for a lot of jobs. But ultimately, my career was because of someone who I had met in that process. My first job came about by Jeff Charles at East Carolina telling me about a vacancy at Radford. Jeff had just started at East Carolina. He had worked at Virginia Tech for years. He had gone to ECU, and he called me one day and said, hey, Bob, he called me July 4th, 1988, not that I remember. And I was asleep because I'd been at a bar in Chapel Hill the night before, but that's really irrelevant at this point. And Jeff called and said, Radford's looking to hire a basketball announcer, and they're going to make it a full-time job with the school. So the connection paid off. And I think we all have that person that helped us to the first job. And from that point on, it's really about your investment. And this has become a very communicative business on a lot of levels for a lot of reasons. But I think it's important that those networking friends become just that. And at the end of the day, when you have a tough day in the business, it's going to be your friends that you talk to about your tough day. Or an opportunity in the business, it's going to be your friends in the business who can relate. Because as we all know, this industry is different than anything else. You sacrifice a ton to get to do something other people say they do for free. And in some cases, they think we'll do it for free now. But that all being said, I think that's the core element for me about networking, and I'll let Paul and Matt share the same concepts.
Well, very similarly, what ends up happening, it's people that when you first meet them and you first get to know them, you don't even entertain the idea that they could be a connection with somewhere down the road. My first job in radio occurred in 1979 at a small station in Cincinnati, whose call letters are WLW. I learned when I worked there, those letters stood for world's lowest wages. But we had a sister station, and I was working as a newscaster and a news reporter, a sister station with another news staff. And there was a gentleman that I would talk to, who had been around him maybe 2 times in person. We would exchange story ideas. And then all of a sudden, I move to a different state, move to a few other different stations and everything. He moves on and does stuff. This guy eventually ends up in Columbus as the executive producer of the Ohio State radio network. I hear his name. Oh, I should just call him just to say hi, see how he's doing. Of course, he won't return a call because he thinks I'm job hunting, which I wasn't. Many years later, I get a call from him. We think we're going to have an opening on the Ohio State radio network. Would you be interested in talking to us about it? So just to Wes's point, somebody that I didn't really know that well but knew, somebody that I'd had a little bit of contact with but hadn't for over 20 years, ends up being a contact to present job now and a job that a lot of people didn't know was going to be open and is very highly coveted. So it is a lot about who you know. We've all been told the stuff about don't burn bridges because you don't know whether it's a competitor, a coworker, or somebody that's a casual acquaintance can be in a position to have an influence on your livelihood. And to Wes's point, too, about friends, more often than not, the friendship with the people that you meet in this business is what helps you get through those tough days or helps the good days be even better. Occasionally, they can be something that helps with a job opportunity or career opportunity. But as this industry has changed, and not all of it for the best, but some of it is, but as it's changed, still one of the best elements about it is the people that you meet.
Yeah, my quick story, I grew up in Ohio and actually a graduate of the Ohio State University. We have to say the, right? Patent pending, yeah, that's right, yep. But when an opportunity, worked at a couple stations in Ohio, one in Columbus and then a couple of smaller market stations, one in Athens and one in a town called Piqua, P-I-Q-U-A. But when the opportunity for me came about to move to Madison, Wisconsin, I didn't know anything about Madison, Wisconsin, other than it was really cold because it's in the state of Wisconsin, right? You got worried about that. But there was somebody I knew had worked with at WNCI who was familiar with the city. He had not worked in the market, but was familiar with Wisconsin, familiar with the city of Madison. And after talking to him, I got more and more intrigued, went up there for the interview on a beautiful day in May, unlike a lot of days where it's not so beautiful up there, and was hired in 1988, and we've been there ever since. But the point is just knowing someone. When you think networking, a lot of times you're thinking, I need to know this executive or this program director, but networking can mean peer-to-peer, someone who does exactly what I want to do or am doing right now, because the word of mouth, that person may know something about a market, an opportunity that's news to me. I mean, to this day, I'll do that. I'll call these guys. If you're just industry discussions, even if it isn't about me personally, it could be somebody I know. It could be, hey, Wes, what are you hearing about what might be happening with such and such opportunity? That's the beauty of the business, and there are conversations that we can have that no one else would have any clue of what we're talking about or any interest of what we're talking about because they don't experience what we experience. It could be the mechanics of a broadcast, where your booth is located, how you prepare your boards. Everybody has a method, but you might learn something just from a simple conversation with someone else. So that to me is what networking is. In addition to maybe getting opportunities, because in the case, I know we have some young broadcasters who are trying to carve that niche. There are others who, like us, we never stop learning. But the thing that I've noticed in the world of broadcasting right now, too, there can be opportunities where they're going to cast a wide net and do a nationwide search. There are other opportunities that pop up where they needed somebody yesterday. And there might be an occasion where you meet someone on a Sunday or a Monday, and then the following Sunday or Monday, there could be an opportunity. Hey, I remember meeting this young man or this young woman who might be a really good fit. The bottom line is you never know when that opportunity could come about, and just getting to know others in the business can go a long way. And a final piece of advice that I'll give you here to start with, Brian Anderson is a good friend of mine, and he's the TV voiced the Milwaukee Brewers, a lot of NBA now, and Major League Baseball on Turner. He emphasizes this a lot, and I wholeheartedly agree. Never underestimate the power of common human decency. Just be a good person. It could buy you a little bit of rope or whatever if you're struggling early in your new job. But the bottom line is, if you're not someone who is real easy to get along with, there's probably 500 people behind you who the bosses would hire in a second. But again, just common human decency, be able to have a conversation with somebody, you'd be amazed at what that could do for you, and oftentimes when you least expect it.
Well, and the part about decency is the biggest part, because you'll end up running into it not only with people you come across casually, people you come across with coworkers, but in the field that we deal with, you deal with it with coaches and athletes. And one of the conversations that we will all have in our idle time talking with one another, it's like, well, what's that coach like to deal with? And the spectrum is pretty wide. There are some who are incredible coaches that are horrible people, and there's some that are coaches that have had mediocre success but are wonderful people, and they're easy to cheer for. So that becomes part of it, and not just even with the athletes and the coaches, the people with a prospective team that you deal with, but how they treat people. With what Matt was saying about human decency goes a long way, and then it can filter down to your own situation with who you meet, who you come across, even if it's just a casual meeting with somebody that 5-10 years down the road, all of a sudden you're in a position to talk to them about an opportunity.
Care to expand on your spectrum?
I will neither confirm nor deny any of the individuals that may be referenced there.
What a disappointing development for the room. Here's the other thing, just in terms of working with people. And I share this story to tell you that I realize more than most that everybody's story and everybody's path is different. I didn't go to television until I was 47 years of age, and I was doing 18 years at Georgia Tech, and I was 9 years into the Falcons and all this other stuff, and up and boom, I went. I left Georgia Tech and 800 and some broadcasts in football and basketball and went to TV. And I quickly found out in TV, it's just a bigger version of radio. It's a bigger team. Our radio team at Georgia Tech at the time was 3 for basketball, 4 or 5 for football, right? In television, we were 32 deep. And the other thing I will tell you about networking is, don't always think of it as your peer. Don't always think of it as the person in the other side. You know, like if you're working for a team like Jeff or anybody else, you're working for a school, it's not necessarily that person. And if you're working for a school and, you know, you potentially may meet somebody who's the assistant AD for external at another school, it's never a bad thing to know that person. The other part about it is, if you're a good teammate at your place, you'll be revered as a good teammate to somebody else when they find out they want to know about you, okay? I also think it's very important, especially now, the way the industry's being built, it's really good if you ever have an opportunity to find out about what else somebody does and how they go about that process to create more versatility in your own file, okay? I caused a bit of a stir my first year in television when I went to the ACC basketball tournament. I was not broadcasting the tournament on television or radio, and one of the reasons I went was I wanted to spend Friday afternoon and Saturday afternoon in the truck watching producers, directors, tape operators, people like that, because I wanted to get at least some behind-the-scenes feel for how I could do my job better and making them more comfortable with me. And I think that's a really critical piece. I think it's important to be a teammate in meetings. If you bring ideas to the table, I think it's also important to be accepting of ideas. One of the goals I have here is, and one of the missions of whatever my board chair administration means or mission is, that I want to engage people of all levels and experience in this industry to be more collaborative. Because, I mean, Matt and Paul and I can learn something from J.P. Shadrick or Chris Lewis or Adam, who we talked to last night, or, you know, Zach Mackey. We can learn things. That's really important for us. I mean, I may do something that's completely foreign because I'm old. I may do something that my dad started doing in 1963 or 62 when he was doing games as a student at Carolina on UNC TV. I may do a version of that now that's foreign to you, and you may think that's interesting. Well, at the same time, apparently there's this app, I don't know if you guys know this thing called OneNote that Microsoft does that apparently is the greatest cheat code in the history of America for prep. And I just found out about it doing the PGA online. And apparently it started in baseball. There are all these people in baseball. Look at Lepay. Yeah, hell yeah, we've been cheating with OneNote for years. Yeah. So, I mean, and lo and behold, I just found out about it. And it's not I say cheat code, and I'm joking. Prep is still prep in this world. But it never hurts to engage in conversation. I mean, I could find out something before I leave here on Tuesday morning that somebody's developed in the process of their preparation that's going to help me do, 20 games of Atlanta Falcons football this year. Or, 15, 16 football games for ACC Network and ESPN. You got to keep your mind open. You can't close it down. And here's the other thing. This sounds ridiculous and it sounds old-fashioned, but it works. Unless you go over and speak to the person or call them during the week before they're coming to your place to do a game or you're going to their place. Now, when you become friends and you got people in other leagues, like if I ever went to Welsh Ryan Stadium, is that what it's called? What's it called? Welsh Ryan Arena? Well, I've been there, the football stadium, right? I got no idea what the hell Northwestern's football setup is. But I know Dave, who does Northwestern, or I know Paul or Matt or Fish or Gary, and I can call and say, hey, what's the deal? What's the TV booth look like at Northwestern? What's the radio booth look like? Or if you're lucky enough and you throw a pro stadium at me and I'm telling you you're going to broadcast from the corner of a dumpster in the NFL, I got a picture of it probably on my phone. So when somebody says, hey, I'm going to Hard Rock Stadium, Matt Lepay's going to Hard Rock Stadium. Hey, Wes, what am I in for? I send him a picture, and he goes, you got to be kidding me. Okay? But that's what I mean. Don't be afraid to go over the week of the game or even before the game starts and introduce yourself. Hey, can I help you? You're coming to town. Is there anything we can do? That kind of thing. Common human just kinship in the industry goes a long, long way. So the other thing that I think we also need to talk about here is pursuing the job and connecting. That's two things. Talking to somebody who may be in a hiring process can be one thing. Developing a relationship with somebody can be entirely different. And I think in all honesty, your work will ultimately stand on its own. We've been doing this particular thing with NSMA long enough now that we've got people who've moved up, 1 step to 2 steps and online. And I think that those are developing relationships, And there'll be some people here in the next 24 to 36 hours who are decision makers, or people who do screen for jobs in one form or fashion, be it play-by-play, be it, anchoring, be it, writing, developing, online opportunities, things of that nature. All you can do is continue to bring your work to the table. Your work will stand on its own. And if you're good people and you've got talent, and word of mouth is as much as it is anything else now. And the other thing, too, is the connection with the institutions or the teams or whatever the case may be. The jobs are going to continue to evolve in this business. That's the one thing we do know, okay? This industry is becoming more volatile because of economics and because of other things and technology. So the industry is going to continue to evolve. Keep chasing your work, refining your work to get the best product line out there. That's the best way to introduce yourself, and also be a good person. Just, hey, I'd like to, send you a tape sometime. I mean, we have a lot of people that want to network or connect by sending information to you. And I'll have people send me an email in October. Hey, can I send you a clip? And I typically respond, send it to me in the spring. Because from about mid-August to about mid-March, I ain't your guy for listening to tapes. I'm too busy listening to coaches and reading on games and on production calls and Zooms and things like that, and, day-to-day with a man in his basement and dogs. So, I mean, that's the concept that you ultimately have to kind of get your arms around is, we do have that window to develop those relationships, but sometimes in-season football, basketball for me, baseball in here for others, maybe other sports, soccer, what have you, lacrosse in the spring, that's where the dynamic of it can change a little bit.
Yeah, one other thing to what Wes was saying, as you're looking at pursuing something else, And I think we've all found this in different times too. It's important that you continue to focus on the job you have at the present. While you may have an idea you want to move up to another level or something, if somebody's considering you, they're going to evaluate what you're doing at the present time. Don't be outward about treating it as a stepping stone. Don't be obvious about expressing any distaste or unhappiness you have with it, because if you're doing games at a certain level, you want to get to another level, but a potential employer is going to be listening to what you're doing. Still tackle the job you have as much as you would want to tackle the job that you want to get.
It's a great point. And one other note, that it's one of the real joys of events like this is that I've had a chance to meet so many people, so many young broadcasters who are starting out, and they'll email, and at times it kind of goes back to Wes's point about just connecting and developing relationships as opposed to pursuing specific opportunities. But I'll get emails here in just in the last couple of weeks from someone just updating me on where he or she is now. Hey, I just want to let you know I'm doing some ESPN Plus down here in the southeast portion of the states, and just wanted to let you know. And occasionally they'll send some samples. Like in our day, we used to send these things called cassette tapes. Young folks ask the older folks what that looks like. Reel to reels, even better. But now with technology being what it is, and us old guys can learn from you young kids about how easy it is now to send audio samples. And let me name drop for 2 minutes here of guys who I got to know. They were just finishing up in college, and their names you probably will recognize. There's a young fellow who went to Beloit College, that is in southern Wisconsin. He was a quarterback on the football team, and when the football season was over, he was working for the school, either radio station or even their small TV station on campus. He was calling Beloit College basketball games, and the coach of Beloit College was a guy who played at Wisconsin back in the mid-'90s, and he emailed me. The coach's name was Brian Vraney. He said, I've got this guy who would love to meet you. He wants to have lunch with you. He's a senior. His name is Joe Davis. And he came out. Joe had already contacted Len Casper, at the time with the Cubs and various other broadcasters, and had lunch with Joe and thought, ooh, okay, this guy's got a little presence to him. He's kind of got his act together. But Joe would keep in touch along the way through his path to what he is now. He would keep me updated. Youngest guy in Double-A baseball, and then he replaced this guy named Scully. Maybe you heard of him out in L.A., and now he's replacing this guy named Buck when you watch the World Series this October. Another young guy, part of the Syracuse group through the years, Chicago, the Mafia, grew up in Chicago, and he spent a lot of time listening to various broadcasters in his travels. And I was actually cleaning out my office a few years ago, finally, and going through some old notes, and this guy sends a card during the holiday. No reason. I wasn't in a position to hire him anywhere, but he had sent me some. We had graduated from cassettes to CDs at that point, so he sent me some audio of the voice of High Point at the time, and Jason Benetti is the guy. And the cool part about both of those guys, and I would really highlight Jason, to this day, if I texted him, he would text back in 2 minutes. I mean, common human decency with those two guys in particular. I'm not just dropping those names to drop names. I'm just saying these are two guys who are always willing to learn. They never feel like they know everything about everything, and they're good people, and they stay in touch. And again, that's something that can go a long way as well. Those two guys are in pretty good shape, but you never know what's around the corner. And just knowing that, hey, these are pretty good people, when all else is equal, that can be a tiebreaker.
Let's get to questions, because I don't want to run out of time here without doing that. And by the clock, we've got a half hour left, and then if there's anything on the back end, I got one more thing I'll share with you. Questions? Start here in the front. Yes, sir. Yep, go ahead.
terrible. I remember watching talking to like the Big Ten guys. There was a Michigan-Indiana game, I want to say about 5 or 6 years ago. Came down to the wire. I think Indiana won it on a 3-pointer at the buzzer. The entire last 5 minutes of the game, including before they sent it back to the studio and ESPN, they never announced the score, and they never even announced the final score. Just figuring people could see it on TV. Do you take that into consideration when you do your talking on TV, like the amount of talking about the score or the time left on the clock, just throwing it in there for different people that may not, I don't like listening to the radio, so I don't listen to the radio with the games. I listen to the reports on TV, or I listen to the games on the TV instead. Do the teams take that into account, or do they bring that up to you guys as announcers?
Well, let me give you 2 points on that. In this day and age of easy accessibility with email and social media, we all go through, you get people who love to comment, not always compliment, but comment on your work. And you have to take most of it with a grain of salt. For everyone that is a complaint, there's probably 10 or 20 others that don't take the time to compliment you. Many years ago, a gentleman that emailed me after listening to an Ohio State football game, and he had a complaint. And his complaint was, you give the score and the time of the game all of the time. You're constantly giving the score and the time. It is aggravating to me. And I took the time to reply to the gentleman. I said, thank you for listening. Thank you for reaching out. Hopefully, because of what you're saying, you always know what the score and the time is. And the second point that I'm going to make to you, and these two gentlemen know, I have the great pleasure to work with an executive producer for Ohio State Radio Network, a gentleman by the name of Skip Mossick, who, as well as having been a producer, and he oversees our statewide news network, he has done a lot of on-air work himself, and he listens and observes with a very constructive ear. And a number of years ago, Skip made the comment, during the football season, once a week we have a meeting for our Ohio State football broadcast. We have an hour-and-a-half pregame show and about an hour postgame show, and it's just to cover all of the bases. And he made a point in addressing what listeners would want to hear, and this may hit your point. Don't assume that everybody's listening knows that C.J. Stroud is the Ohio State quarterback. Don't assume that everybody knows that Jackson Smith and Jigba and Marvin Harrison are receivers for Ohio State. As you're doing the game, and those of us that are sports fans, you flip on games and listen for teams you don't know about, you don't necessarily care about, you're just listen to a sporting event. Approach it as though, and that's what we've done in recent years, that the people listening don't know who's with what team. So those who are familiar with it, it may be a little redundant to them, but again, following to your point, you're trying to provide a service to somebody who maybe isn't as familiar with the teams involved as those who do follow them and listen and or watch all the time.
Well said. The Indiana, was it Michigan you said? The Indiana-Michigan game, right? Okay. I was thinking of Indiana-Kentucky basketball where Christian Watford hit the shot, and I absolutely know that the television call of that was mass chaos. Oh, Christian Watford. I remember the call. The radio call by Don Fisher is easily in the top 3 calls of the last decade of any kind of play-by-play. It's not even close, and you can find it on YouTube. Just Google Don Fisher, Fischer, Watford shot, and it'll pop up on YouTube. It's easily in the last decade one of the 3 best play-by-play calls I've ever heard of anything. I mean, parking cars. He could describe parking cars, and it would be. But that call in particular was great. All right, next question. Anybody else? Networking. Okay, cocktails. No, sorry, Robert.
What is the best place to network in this industry?
Right here. I'm, and look, you guys you have a lot of peers in this industry who aren't in this room. I tried to tell people that go to the school where I went, you want to make a move forward in this business. You want to find out the real deep end of the pool. This is the place to go. This is the only organization in the country that is gearing right now to college students just out of college, first job, second job, development situation. I mean, some of you guys have come year in and year out, and I'm grateful for that, especially as someone who's now involved in the administrative side of the organization. But I'm grateful for the fact you've come here because you get something from it. That's the key element. I mean, the first one we ever did at the old Holiday Inn in Salisbury, Chris, you were at the first one, right? Chris came to the first one that we did, golly, how many years ago was that, right? And so it's hopefully gotten better, and now we've expanded it to 2 days, and there are a lot more people involved in it, and you're going to hear from incredible people tomorrow. And so I think this is the best place. But beyond this, Robert, the idea of connecting while you're here, and again, let's take the positives of social media into account here. Most of us have a Twitter account. Most of us have a IG account. I had IG because I had to follow my kids because they didn't have Twitter. And now look at me, I'm following them on Snap, and I never post, but yes, I do own a TikTok account. And no, you're never going to see it. No, you're never going to see it. But I think that's the easy way to message. I mean, I remember when I left Georgia Tech, I had a bunch of emails come in from people who I'd met through this process and people who I'd never met. You know, and that's the traditional way. But I think now with social media, and like, you know, JP will send me a text or I'll hear from other people, and that's the easy way too. And again, good people, community business is the way I've always looked at it. So.
I'm not in your industry. I just lucky to be here local in Winston-Salem, and I'm a cheerleader for Winston-Salem, and I'm a cheerleader for NSMA. But we want you back. You might not win next year, but we want you back. Or
Yeah.
you didn't win last year. I hope you're still here this year.
Yeah, that's it.
We want to grow this for
This particular part.
selfishly Winston-Salem from my standpoint, but honestly, it's been I went to Salisbury a couple of times before I ever got involved with the organization. So we want to see you every year.
I appreciate that.
Benefit from that.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes, sir, here in the front.
Promoting yourself and how you should set up your accounts as far as like just presenting your platform and your brand on social media?
Social media pointers, that kind of thing. Yeah, there's one at 12:30. Yeah, there is one at 12:30. That's a part of it for sure. For me, I'm very aware of what I am and who I am and what I'm doing, right? So for me on Twitter, I am typically an information person. I don't think that, you know, my dad gave me a piece of advice, and I refer to my dad a lot more since he's passed away than I probably ever did when he was alive, but there was one thing he said to me that has stuck with me in a big way, and that was when you get into this business, when people turn a game on, they don't care who you vote for and they don't care where you went to church, right? And I live by that one. I mean, because they're getting to me because they want to know what the score is, what the time is, and where the ball is, and who's playing. For me on social media, I kind of treat it the same way. I provide information. If there's something I think I need to say, Matt Ryan was traded after 14 years. My personal opinion on that will remain my personal opinion, but I thought it was appropriate for me to, on social media, post a picture of Matt Ryan and say thanks for everything you did for the organization. When somebody loses their job, I think you have to be cognizant. If you support that particular player, coach, owner on social media, there's going to be some blowback. But I think you also have to understand, too, that if you're doing play-by-play, you're not the analyst. If you're the play-by-play guy, you're informing people of information. Like during the ACC season, you know, when people are hammering away at how bad the league is, and I'm supposed to be following America's basketball conference, the Southeastern Conference at the time, who didn't have anybody in the Final Four that I can recall. But in January and February, I was posting things about ACC basketball, and amazingly, SEC fans were in my timeline telling me they were only going to get one team in the tournament. Well, the easy thing is not to acknowledge, as Jeff said, don't look at your mentions, right? But for me, I was trying to be informative about the league and where the league might be going. And that's what I would tell you. But also hang around at 12:30 because those are people who really understand it. I don't look at analytics and I don't look at mentions much.
That's right. The other part about social, it's great to hear Wes reference his dad. Those of us who are fortunate enough to know Woody and still think about Woody, especially when we pull out the Hey Woody T-shirt. My father was not in the broadcasting business. He couldn't believe I got into it because I think he was afraid I'd move back in the house and not do well. But I will say to you, whether it's on the air, social media, whatever, my father left me a number of statements. They're in my mind, some that I can say in public, and one of them was, don't tell it all. Don't tell everything you know, because even in a on-air capacity as a game announcer, whatever, you become privy with your relationship with coaches and at the professional level with athletes. And if you want to ruin a network opportunity, divulge something that's told to you off the record or not for publication. So it just, I don't know, channeling Woody Durham, I just thought, don't tell it all.
Yeah. And quick add to that, you can't emphasize two words: be careful. If you're up for a job and you're in that final group, chances are the people doing the hiring is going to take a look at it, see what do you have on there. So in my case, I'll goof off a little bit, but it's so light, it's really harmless, but otherwise it's a lot of information, it's support. If it's an athlete who's been named all conference or somebody who's just signed a deal, the NFL, the NBA, whatever, you retweet that and say, hey, this is great. I've been a big fan of this guy on and off the floor, on and off the field, that type of thing. But yeah, the commentary, that's a little kind of to Wes's point, and pretty good advice from his father, especially in our world of play-by-play. When the game's on, they're really interested in our description of the game and leave it at that. Otherwise, you could be potentially putting yourself into a tough spot.
Since we're talking about career development here, I will tell you the candidate lists are pared down based on social media. And I'll also tell you, too, that coaches now, when they look at a kid in the transfer portal, absolutely go to social media first. I know that there are 4 ACC coaches, football, basketball, or baseball, that have told me before they ever talked to the kid in the portal, they looked at social media because they want to know what they're getting. And that's kind of where they fall in. So I think social media is a big, to me, and I have this old school thing, I always tell everybody, you got to take care of your own .com, like yourname.com. And I would tell you, your name.com needs to be in good shape. It needs to be A+ stuff. And there are people in our industry that have pared lists down looking at social media for jobs. Yes, sir. Well, believe it or not, I've probably made 2 or 3 career errors that in hindsight I shouldn't have done. One was that I apparently at some point made the wrong comment to a guy who ultimately ran ESPN regional television. And so when I wanted to do some games or a game back in the 1990s, my name was dust in the office. So I had to find a different route. And then the other thing is, I think you have to realize, and I actually said this, I think, Zach, we were talking about this last night. I think you have to realize that you can only do what you can do to make that move in your career. You can only do as much as you can do to put yourself in a position for a job. At some point, it moves to somebody else's decision, okay? There are a lot of talented guys in this country who don't work at Power 5 or NBA or Major League Baseball or NFL. I mean, they work at FCS, they work at Division II, they're Division III, right? I mean, they're talented people in this country all over the place, right? It's not just the guys that show up on TV or the ones that you hear on national syndicated radio or whatever the case may be. And I think you have to come to grips with a little bit of that. And I think we all get there at different places and different ways. You know, I've had goals early in my career, and I've still got goals in my career right now because I'm a competitive somebody when it comes to this industry. But I think we also all have to have a comfort level. And early in my career, I didn't have that. I didn't have that understanding that, hey, at some point you've done all you can do and it's somebody else's decision. And I regret that now, severely regret that. I'm grateful for all the friendships in this industry that I have, and I love them, but that part I regret.
I would say we all have to deal with bosses, and you're all going to be subjected to something that you don't think's a great idea. It's not how you would want to go about doing it, or it's different from how you have done it. And I could look back in my 20s in particular and wish that when I had had some things that were put down my throat that I maybe as a young person protested a little too much about, that I wished I hadn't, or at least taken a step back and thought more about it. And just because it's always been done one way or it's always been done your way doesn't necessarily mean there's another way around it. So the short version of all of that is to be as open-minded as possible about what's being presented to you, even if it's not something you're a fan of, like the discussion we had about Big Ten Media Day earlier today.
That's right. I don't seem to recall that. No, never mind. It's a great question because I think when I look back, it's kind of interesting that you asked that question, and this topic is about networking because when I was starting out, I wasn't very good at it. By nature, I'm pretty introverted, and I wasn't as aggressive or as assertive, that's probably the better word, as I could have or should have been in introducing myself to others, either if it's a boss, a potential boss, or anybody. Wasn't as good at that. Over time, develop more confidence in the business. But that's one of the encouraging things that I've noticed at an event like this through the years is that a lot of young broadcasters are more assertive of introducing. The fact that you're here puts you ahead of the curve. So that's probably the best piece of advice that I would have given myself. I would have probably kicked myself in the rear a little bit more early to get out and know people. Better late than never. I did, but I wish I would have started a little earlier.
Okay, where am I going here? I see hands everywhere. Nick in the back, next.
How do you guys feel about agents, and have any of you ever had one, or know someone that have one?
I think somebody's pleading the fifth. Yeah. The situation is different for each, and I will explain this. So the radio station Columbus I work for has had a number, of high-profile athletes, former Ohio State Buckeyes, who have worked there, and that have gone on and done work for various television networks. That would be one of them. And these are guys that were involved as athletes with agents and then made that part of their transition into the broadcasting field. My approach was kind of the opposite because I got the job without an agent. I've been able to negotiate each of my subsequent contracts without an agent, and most importantly, I knew that my general manager would be alienated by the presence of an agent. Now, I have used an attorney just to go over contract language to make sure there's no trap doors there. But I think the situation is very different. It can be very beneficial for those that are putting a lot of effort to aspire to TV, network TV level, things like that, to open doors for you that aren't open. But also getting those doors open through networking, through your contacts that you make personally, and also dealing with a prospective employer on a one-to-one situation. Again, depending on the situation, can be just as good. So I don't know that there's a flat answer for that. It probably is very important to have one when you're talking about pay grades that some of us aren't in, but there's not one answer to that can fit all opportunities in all situations.
Yeah, as Paul said, personal choice. I don't have an agent by strict definition. There's a friend of mine who is an agent, and I have used him in just certain instances, just to kind of what Paul was saying, to look over language and just to make sure it looks decent. But as Paul said, if it's about bigger money, depending on the size of the platform that you're working for, that may be a necessity. But I can tell you, you have to kind of pick your spots. For 8 years, I was a backup television broadcaster with the Milwaukee Brewers, and I can tell you they were very pleased to know that I did not have an agent. So it wasn't. An agent probably wasn't going to help me a whole lot in that situation anyway. It was a very clean, simple contract, but it depends on the language of the contract, and if you're at ESPN, Big Fox, maybe you probably better have one. But in our cases, Paul and I, it probably isn't all that necessary.
I wouldn't have an agent if I didn't do the Atlanta Falcons. Now, my agent helped me go to television at 47 when I was deemed too old by a lot of people. But I wanted to give television a try, and it worked out. And I had an agent who had experience in converting people to different platforms. I would say this. I think if you are early in your career, you can move forward without the agent. The bigger the job, the bigger the company, it probably requires some degree of representation. However, I think you need to think about that agent, and you need to talk to more than one if you don't have somebody who you trust implicitly who's also in the business that has representation. And I also think, too, that any agent you call ought to be willing to let you talk to one of their clients. The company that represents me, I signed with them in a 72-hour period. It's a long, gory story because I was actually out of town and out of state when the Atlanta Falcons job came open, and the deal had to be done, and I had relationship with the guy who ultimately was my agent that I signed with. He and I had talked 3-4 years earlier about a potential NFL job, not the Falcons, that somebody wanted to talk to me about because they heard a Georgia Tech broadcast driving through Atlanta talk about your work being aired sometimes, and you never know who's listening, right? I would tell you this, if you're thinking about an agent, you ought to talk to somebody that's in that firm and talk to another client. And I think you ought to talk to more than one agent. Before you sign with one, you ought to talk to at least two, and not two agents in the same firm. So that can be tricky as well. Yes, sir. Well, let me go over here. Hang on. Go right here real quick. I'm going to try and get all three of these. Go ahead right here.
It is, and let me take a shot at that. Certainly what happens now that didn't when all of us got started are games being done on internet platforms, and there are some people who are looking for that. The other thing that we run into, I know Matt does, as I do, with the college schedules now, you have such an overlap of football and basketball that there are opportunities, let me change that, there are needs for fill-in and substitute announcers, and that's always a good way to look. If you're familiar with such and such university that's involved with whatever network provider, or maybe not even a network, but if you know they're going to have an overlap where the main announcer has to be someplace else. In our situation, our company is involved with Ohio State football, men's and women's basketball, as well as Ohio State hockey. And we do at times find ourselves having to reach outside of our normal circle to get somebody to fill in for a game or two. Those are some of the things that maybe just to keep in mind, that if you're aware of people that are involved in things like this, there might be a need for somebody to fill in at a particular time. That's just an off-the-top thought about something now that is there more than ever with college football seasons going longer and college basketball seasons starting earlier. That's the tough part, and that's the hardest part. But, however, it goes back to how we all started when you used to take your Marantz tape recorder to go to a game and sit in an upper press box where nobody's there and rehearse doing it. I mean, that's how I was able to get started. I know these guys did too. And you just take, I joke when I say Marantz, but you probably do it on your phone now, or get some sort of a hookup with a microphone and go to a game and just practice. Get game notes now can be gotten so easy on teams' websites and things like that, and go to a game and practice doing it away from everybody else.
There are young kids in the Atlanta area who are in high school, because there are several schools in Atlanta, both public and private, that have some broadcasting element to them. And I've been asked to come talk to a group one time that had about 16 kids, ages 14 to 17, 14 to 18. And basically, they go to these private school games and they swap out halves. I would say, without knowing the community or area you're from, there's probably a high school game going on somewhere. They have a roster card, and this sounds old school, but damn right, this is what happens. This is the only way to do it, is to go and take some form of recording equipment and do it, and do the game, and come up with it. Now, you may not want to take the first one and ship it off to somebody, but you may want to take version 5 or version 6 of that year, where you refine your preparation and things like that. And that's the discipline and challenge of the whole deal, is to feel yourself getting better and more confident in the way you do it. So, over here. Yes, sir. Are you from the Fighting Austin Peay State University Governors? Bring it like you mean it. Go ahead.
Something that you hear and they wanted to reach out to you later on, how would you suggest they go about it to, like, keep your interest, or to try to, I guess, let you know that they're,
I think everybody here, from a standpoint of evaluation and progress, is reachable, one way or another, social media or not. And probably social media being the easiest one right now. But I would also say this too: don't be scared to give them a card. Don't be scared to hand them your email address. I think the first time we did this, Chris, I think I wrote my email address up on the board and told everybody, here's my email address, you can send it to me, or here's my Twitter account, or whatever it was. I think that's part of our job. Our job as people who've been able to carve out a career of sort is to pay it forward. The responsibility of us in this industry right now is let all the landscape and all the other stuff change. The technology, the way you think I like 2 years ago staring at monitors and trying to do ACC football on a standard definition Zoom call? No, but that's what you had to do. But our responsibility is to make sure that we try and create a path in this business for everybody else to have some degree of success and enjoyment. So I would say don't be scared to produce a card or ask them for their email, whatever the case may be, if it's a connection you want to try and establish. And I think most guys who are announcers, writers, broadcast, we understand that part. I mean, there are plenty of acquaintances through the years in this room for me that, like, somebody would know how to get in touch, that kind of thing. And I think that's part of the growing process too. When you have tape you want to get to, you know, you can, through this organization or others, find ways to connect with people to share that example. Does that help? Okay. All right, where are we on the clock here, Kraus? We're almost at the end, and I'm holding up lunch. It's a box lunch. It's lovely. Chris, last one.
The stories, there's only so many or so much of a story you can tell during a game broadcast, but there are so many other platforms, you know, with Paul with Ohio State, and in my case, the University of Wisconsin. There are television shows with social media, much like Jeff's talking about with the Bengals, with there's, you know, video or, you know, video component, and there's a pretty big video component now at most universities, including ours. It's a great platform to tell those stories. You certainly can get in anecdotes during a game broadcast, but you use the other avenues, I think, to best get those stories out there. I know speaking for Wisconsin, and not me specifically telling the stories all of the time, but they've done a great job, whatever the issues are, you know, social issues, environmental issues, whatever the case. Athletes have been given the opportunity to help tell their stories. So yeah, you take advantage of that with with the different avenues that are available now that was certainly not the case 15, maybe even 10 years ago.
And I'll add to that, too, that some of it depends on the accessibility that you have. Social media has helped with some of the things that student athletes, at least in the college level that we deal with, that they put out there. But depending on the school team that you're involved with, there are some that make athletes more available than others. The pro level locker rooms are open, where you can go and you can start to establish not a friendship but a relationship to exchange some of that. At the collegiate level, that's very, very limited. I know that one of the things that used to scare the bejesus out of Jim Tressel when he was the coach at Ohio State was that bowl games, the locker rooms would be open. They were not open during the regular season. And so the media people that covered the football team enjoyed that. But the other part with those stories, and it differs from radio to TV, in television, when the screen is giving you so much of the basics, time and score, you have time to work some of that in. In radio, you're a little limited with some of that, especially if you have a long-winded analyst that you work with. So you can't just, and I don't mean that for any analyst that any of us work with presently, but that can limit how you can insert some of those elements. So you have to, while you compile all of that, and this will go to what's going on with preparation tomorrow, you prepare so much, but you can't always get everything in, and you don't want to shoehorn it in if it doesn't fit.